The men arrived at dawn. Bodyguards, drivers, and senior officials that hold power in Tehran. They came to work near Pasteur Street, where the supreme leader kept his offices, where Ayatollah Ali Khamenei conducted the business of ruling Iran. They had no idea they were being watched. Not by Iranian counterintelligence, not by the Revolutionary Guards, but by the Israelis. Years earlier, we don't know exactly when, but Israeli operatives had penetrated the digital infrastructure of Tehran. Nearly all the traffic cameras in the capital had been hacked. Their feeds encrypted, their images transmitted across the Mediterranean to servers in Tel Aviv and southern Israel. This was not a quick operation. This was patient, methodical, comprehensive surveillance conducted over years. One camera had an angle that proved particularly useful. It overlooked a parking area near the complex. The Israelis watched the bodyguards arrive. They watched them park their personal cars. They watched the rhythms of security rotations. They watched who came and who went. They built a map of the compound's operations from the outside in, from the parking lot to the corridors to the inner sanctum where decisions were made. The intelligence officers called it a pattern of life. It's a term from the tradecraft of surveillance. You watch someone long enough, you learn their habits. You learn when they wake up, when they leave home, what route they take, who they meet, what time they arrive at work, what time they leave. You build a three-dimensional model of their existence from the outside. The dossiers grew thicker. Names were added. Addresses were recorded. Hours of duty were logged. Routes to work were mapped. And most importantly, the crucial detail that made all the other details matter. The Israelis determined who these men were assigned to protect, who they transported, who they guarded. The security apparatus of the supreme leader became transparent. The Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence service, was recruiting human assets, placing operatives inside the system, building networks of informants, creating eyes and ears throughout Tehran. Military intelligence was digesting it all. Billions of data points, signals, intercepts, human intelligence, imagery, communications, financial records, travel patterns, meeting schedules, all of it flowing into a single analytical apparatus. And from this assembly line of data and analysis, a single product emerged. Targets. Specific people, specific locations, specific times. The supreme leader would be in his offices on Saturday morning. He would be meeting with his senior advisors. They would be in a specific compound, at a specific time, in a specific configuration. The Israelis knew. They knew because they had been watching for years. They knew because they had hacked the cameras and intercepted the communications and recruited the informants and analyzed the patterns. They knew because they had built an intelligence picture so dense, so detailed, so comprehensive that they could predict the movements of the most heavily guarded man in Iran. And when Saturday morning came, when the bodyguards arrived at dawn to take their positions, when the supreme leader entered his offices, when the meeting began, the Israelis were ready. Here's how it all unfolded. The world was still asleep when President Trump posted to Truth Social.
To the great proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered, don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside.
7 words that would reshape the Middle East. 7 words that would echo across continents and change the calculus of power in ways we're still measuring. The hour of your freedom is at hand. But before that message reached the Iranian people, before the world even knew what was happening, the machinery of war was already in motion. The Gang of 8, the congressional leadership who hold the nation's secrets, received their notification. Not a briefing, not a consultation, a notification. minutes before the first missile left its launcher. At 1:15 a.m. Eastern Time, as February 28th broke over the Persian Gulf, the largest concentration of American military firepower in a generation began to move. More than a dozen warships, 2 aircraft carriers, hundreds of aircraft, thousands of personnel, all coordinated with Israeli forces in an operation that had been planned in secret for months. Operation Epic Fury had begun. Let's rewind, because this didn't start on February 28th. It started in February when the United States and Iran sat down to talk about the one thing that terrified Washington: Iran's nuclear program. February 6th, Muscat, Oman. Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, sat across from Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Jared Kushner was there, and so was Admiral Brad Cooper, commander of CENTCOM. The admiral's presence was deliberate, a visual reminder that the USS Abraham Lincoln was offshore, waiting. The Iranians drew a line. "We will discuss the nuclear issue," Araghchi said. "Solely the nuclear issue." Trump's response was unambiguous. No nuclear weapons, no missiles, no this, no that. They were speaking different languages. The Iranians wanted to negotiate one thing. The Americans wanted to negotiate everything. February 17th, Geneva. Both sides agreed to draft deals. The Americans set a deadline. Final proposal by the end of the month. There was hope. But beneath the surface, the fault lines were widening. Araghchi claimed the U.S. hadn't demanded zero enrichment. Witkoff said Iran had crossed Trump's red line.
Accept anything less than zero nuclear enrichment?
We don't want any enrichment.
The disagreement wasn't about details. It was about fundamentals. Iran wanted the right to enrich uranium. Trump wanted zero enrichment. These positions were irreconcilable. February 26th, Geneva. Oman tried to broker a breakthrough. Indirect talks in the morning, direct talks in the afternoon. Oman announced that Iran had agreed to never stockpile enriched uranium. They called it a major breakthrough that has never been achieved. But the devil was in the details. Iran proposed diluting the uranium in country. The U.S. demanded it be transferred abroad. Iran said it had every right to enjoy peaceful nuclear energy, including enrichment. Trump said, "I say no enrichment, not 20%, 30%.
I say no enrichment. Not 20%, 30%. They always want 20%, 30%. They want it for civilian, for civil. I think it's uncivil. So I'm not happy with it.
They agreed to send technical teams to the IAEA headquarters the following Monday. That Monday never came. On Saturday, February 28th, at 7 a.m. local time, the bombs started falling. The operation was built on a tactic called time on target. It's a concept from military doctrine. Calculate the trajectories and timings so precisely that everything arrives at the same moment. Israeli jets, U.S. cruise missiles from destroyers and submarines, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, F-35s, possibly F-22s, carrier-based aircraft from the USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford, all striking simultaneously across Tehran, Karaj, Qom, Kermanshah, and Isfahan. The goal was systemic shock. Blind the regime, collapse the command structure in one synchronized wave. The first wave came from the sea, Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the Persian Gulf and Arabian Sea. They targeted radars and command bunkers. The Iranian air defense system, the homegrown Bavar batteries, and the Russian-supplied systems should have activated, should have responded. They didn't, because the Americans had already blinded them. Advanced electronic warfare, cyber operations, deception tactics coordinated from space, sea, and air. The Iranians' air defense network was overwhelmed before the first fighter jet crossed the border. AGM-160 mauled mini-drones, decoys that mimicked incoming fighter squadrons, drew fire and opened corridors. The Iranian defenders fired at ghosts, while real aircraft penetrated undetected. The B-2 bombers hit the deep bunkers. The F-15E Strike Eagles targeted mobile missile launchers. The carrier-based aircraft sustained pressure with follow-on strikes. And in a first for combat operations, CENTCOM's Task Force Scorpion Strike deployed Lucas drones, low-cost unmanned combat attack systems, reversed engineered from Iranian Shahed 136 technology, costing about $35,000 each. Hundreds of strikes in the first 12 hours. The targets were systematic, methodical, comprehensive. IRGC command and control facilities, air defense capabilities, missile and drone launch sites, military airfields, nuclear research facilities, the Iran Atomic Energy Agency headquarters, the explosive testing facility in Barshin, the Isfahan nuclear complex, the Ministry of Intelligence, the Ministry of Defense, military research facilities, and the nerve center of Iranian government itself. In Tehran, on Saturday morning, a meeting was taking place. Senior Iranian officials gathered at a compound. The supreme leader, his military advisors, his security team, and the men who ran the regime. America and Israeli intelligence knew about it. The timeline was accelerated, and the strikes hit University Street, the Jamari district, Pasteur Street, Khamenei's primary offices, his compound. When the dust settled, the Israeli Defense Force released a list of the dead. The death of Ayatollah Khamenei was confirmed by Israeli officials, US officials, and Iranian state media. The supreme leader of Iran, the man who had ruled for decades, who had survived wars and sanctions and coups, was dead. At 85 years old, there was likely a continuity plan already in place, but plans and reality are different things. Operation Epic Fury and Operation Roaring Lion were likely the start of a prolonged conflict. The US-Israeli coalition had moved beyond counter-proliferation targets. They were seeking to destroy the Iranian government entirely. The conflict had already spread across the Middle East. Strikes in more than half a dozen countries within the first few hours. Regional powers signaling their willingness to respond. The Strait of Hormuz threatened with closure. Global oil markets watching nervously. The immediate risk of Iranian nuclear weapons development had been significantly reduced. But new risks had emerged. Proliferation risks, scattered scientists, unknown stockpiles, a collapsing regime, a regime on edge. Trump had announced the operation with a message to the Iranian people. The hour of your freedom is at hand. But freedom is complicated. The US officials argued that limiting Iran's nuclear capability could reduce its ability to support regional proxy networks. It could limit Iran's ability to close the Strait of Hormuz. It could constrain Iran's growing influence in the Middle East. But military operations create their own consequences. Unintended ones, cascading ones. The operation had been planned over several months. The force buildup had been visible for weeks. More than a dozen warships, 2 aircraft carriers, the largest concentration of American military firepower in a generation, began to move. All while negotiations were ongoing. All while the U.S. was claiming to seek a diplomatic solution. The Iranians had seen it coming. They had to have known. But they had also seen the red lines. They had also seen the ultimatums. And they had chosen not to cross them. Or they had chosen to cross them anyway, believing that the Americans would not follow through. They were wrong. Who will succeed Khamenei? At 85 years old, there was likely a continuity plan. But plans and reality diverge. The succession could be contested. It could be chaotic. It could create opportunities for regime change from within, which was Trump's stated objective. Will the Gulf states respond directly? Saudi Arabia and the UAE have signaled their willingness. But signaling and acting are different things. The regional dynamics are complex. The calculations are intricate. Will Iran's nuclear scientists scatter? Will they pose proliferation risks? Will non-state actors or hostile nations attempt to recruit them? These are the questions that will define the next phase of the conflict. Will the Strait of Hormuz be closed? Will global oil markets be disrupted? Will the economic consequences of this conflict ripple across the world? Will this be a limited operation or the beginning of a prolonged conflict? The operation had achieved its immediate military objectives. The Iranian regime had been decapitated. The military had been degraded. The nuclear program had been set back. The air defenses had been overwhelmed. The command structure had been collapsed. But the larger question remains unanswered. What comes next?